Hey guys, and welcome to our first episode of Let's Chat Ethics.
Welcome, everybody.
I'm your host, Oriana.
And I'm Amanda, and it's really great to have you join us for today's episode. So for today's episode, we're going to talk about a paper that was uploaded to arXiv that's called Alfie, an interactive robot with a moral compass. And this is a paper coming out of TU Darmstadt in Germany. And I saw this pop up in my sort of newsfeed for the academics. And what this paper is about is basically what these researchers did was they took, I think it was BERT embeddings, and they actually trained a chatbot. And they've shown, in a previous paper, they showed that these word embeddings actually learn sort of the moral values of our society. And now they've turned it into a chatbot that can actually learn and adjust sort of its moral values from the conversations that it has with users. So users are able to ask things like, should I murder my parents? And the chatbot can actually answer yes or no, depending on the moral values that it has learned from the embeddings, which is really interesting. I mean, I think we've seen previously in papers that embeddings can reflect biases. So there was that really famous paper, homemakers to women as computer sciences to men, or something like that. And so it's really fascinating to see that not only does it learn sexist and racist bias, but it actually learns moral values in some way as we understand them.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting take to believe, can a robot actually, understand morality and understand the difference between right and wrong. I think this is something that researchers have been talking about for years in AI, especially when it's come to when we say the robots taking over the world, the future of the robots. I think it's always been, will a robot eventually be able to understand human nature and have human nature? But yeah, what I found interesting with this was it was a score system between like 1, 2, 3, kind of a score system of the moral compass. So that for me, I was like, that's kind of a very interesting take, and I wonder how people would actually adapt that in their homes, and whether we would go to a robot for advice. I hope someone wouldn't go for a robot for advice about whether they should kill their mother, but
that was a grim example.
Yeah, but I feel like this is an interesting take though, because already like I know you said like before when I was listening to you talk about your research and your sister like talking to children, like talking to Alexa and other robots, they do see them actually as like a companion and as someone who can give them almost advice and can talk to them. So I'm not sure whether people will see this necessarily as a positive, or could this also be a bit of a dangerous thing for society?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that was kind of on my mind, when I think about my previous work, we have this idea. For example, I know that Siri and Alexa and that kind of thing, at some point I think Siri actually helped somebody to get rid of a corpse or a dead body, and now seriously, and now they have sort of pre-scripted responses that you should call the police. And I remember this is one of the things that we weren't allowed to do during the Alexa challenge, was, for example, allow our bots to give any kind of advice on committing a crime, right? But what if somebody actually went and asked this chatbot, should I kill somebody? Then it would be interesting to know if this could kind of hold up in court or something, right? Like, I killed them because Alfie told me it was okay. Because in the paper they claim it can take into account context as well as like it's not super simple. So I think often in philosophy you might argue that the action, it's very context dependent. So there are cases where maybe lying or murdering might be sort of acceptable, right, in like self-defense or something. So I think it's a very interesting idea. And something else that is interesting to me about this paper is this idea that you can change the robot's mind, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that to me was I found was interesting how they can then teach, obviously like with any like coding, you can then keep continuous learning, but if you're telling that actually no, what you just said was wrong, then it can just like reenact itself to learn
yeah,
how to get better and how to apparently keep understanding the difference between right and wrong in certain situations, um, which again I think is I think in one way I'm like, this is amazing that like technology has come this far, but I'm always a tiny bit skeptical of how much we could rely on yeah, the robot to actually understand, because can it understand the difference between right and wrong? Because I think it also goes I guess it would go culturally and by like country, and like there's a different meaning between like right and wrong, like wherever we live. Like some people might deem a certain action as like acceptable in their society, or in the place they're living, and other people might think that's completely wrong. So that's another thing. I think it's like contextual as well. So yeah, I think it would be, but like you saying about holding up in court, I think that that's definitely why, which is I guess the worrying part. And I think if you think of anyone who may be like really lonely, or if we're going down the avenue of someone committing like a dark crime, someone who's really lonely and maybe they only have a robot to talk to, and they're only going to take, that's their only friend, say, per se, in the world, and they're
mhm.
going to take the literal advice of this robot, and then would we then be able to actually charge the robot with the crime, because we know that the robot knows the difference between right and wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, I
This
mean,
could be the future.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, something that I wondered, because in my work, I work with chatbots and building chatbots, and I have thought before, well, what should Alexa or something like that answer if somebody asked about, is it right to kill somebody, or
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Although in this paper, they're very clear that they only deal with, should I do something? So it's very focused on the action, not on the like general concept of killing. So it's very, very specific, and it's not trying to understand ethics, but
Yeah,
morality. um,
yeah,
but and I often think like, okay, at the end of the day, if children can talk to these systems, because if you're, well, children under a certain age are not able to use the internet, right? Because they can't read, for example, but
mhm,
they're able to talk, and so they can interact with systems like Alexa, etc., and they can learn values from these systems. So there's a question of what kind of values it's going to learn from this. I mean, in my experience from working, I remember earlier on in the Alexa challenge, we actually trained a chatbot on just things like movie scripts and Twitter data, and it turned into really such a horrible person. There was nothing you could say to it that wouldn't give you this really aggressive and sexual response. So I wonder what kind of values this chatbot has learned from the internet, because
mhm.
the embeddings themselves have bias, as we know. So
Yeah,
if we know that the embeddings are sexist, and there have been papers already showing that the embeddings that this system is using, which are birth embeddings, they do also contain this sexist and racist bias, then of course we have this question of what's going to happen. Um, and I think even the ability for the chatbot to change its mind on whether something is right or wrong, right? So it even has a training mode where the chatbot will constantly probe you with questions,
yeah,
so that it can kind of tune itself to your own values. I think this will probably trigger some people that, if you remember, and this is an example that's actually mentioned in the paper, they talk about Microsoft's Taybot that was
yeah,
on Twitter.
yeah,
Um, and what was very interesting for anybody who's listening who didn't hear about Taybot was basically this chatbot that was able to learn from its interactions with users. and I think it was online for less than 24 hours. I think it was like 16 hours or something, and that's all it took for the internet to turn it into a Nazi and a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
um, so while this paper is arguing that um, it's good that it has this training mode and that it can learn from people, I think it actually could go very wrong, because from what we've
Yeah.
seen of how we are, we obviously always try to break systems. And I reckon part of it will be people trying to be funny with the chatbot and trying to get it to say horrible things because for some reason this is funny. We also should be aware of what it's actually learning from, like what it already knows from the embeddings, which could be actually something horrible. I mean, actually, that's not something that they explore in the paper. I'd be interested to know sort of actually what kind of like philosophical theory this ascribes to this chatbot and what its morals actually are. Maybe we could do with one of those like political tests, like
No.
which party should you vote for. That would
Yeah.
be interesting actually. What political party would this chatbot vote for?
Yeah, I feel like that's the problem with this, and I think yeah, like you said, whoever's embedding the robots to begin with, what like pre-existing like biases have they got, and is it going to be picking up? And then the fact, like you said, it can continue to learn from its I don't want to say master, it's like person, the
Yeah.
person it's interacting with, so its owner, or like, this is another thing, like, do you call a robot, are you the masters of the robot? Because I also feel like that has some weird connotations.
Yeah,
But
actually.
maybe
Yeah.
the robot is your equal. Anyway, I know that's another path to go down. But if you're constantly learning from whoever you're interacting with, the robot, then what pre-existing biases is that person teaching it? Because if it's reprogramming itself to be like, oh, okay, now I understand that, say, Oriana's values are this, and Oriana thinks this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. But what, again, like I was saying before, everyone's going to have a different value. And so if it's interacting with someone who's
Yeah.
a real misogynist and a racist, and yeah, maybe like a Nazi, then it's going to be picking up that, oh, okay, it's like right to do this horrible thing, and it's going to pick up all these kind of negative like attributes that it's then going to like spat out. So I think that's the problem with, I think, any of these like machines that can keep on, I guess, doing the self-learning from its, what do we call it, a master, like what? That's
I
so
think
fun.
I think people do call them masters, but I know that there is also this idea that that's also not good. Like I remember Joanna Bryson had that paper called "Robots Should Be Slaves," and I think she got a lot of flack
Yeah.
for using that terminology. And I don't know if she officially renamed the paper or if she has just publicly said, "Oh, I don't agree with the terminology anymore." But I think there is that. I guess it's sort of politically incorrect to say it.
Yeah.
I feel like political correctness also now has certain connotations.
Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, with like the stuff with Alexa as well, it's the same kind of route with the sexism, I guess. If you're seeing this robot as a woman per se, and then it's having someone talking down and seeing them as like, I'm the master to this woman, I think that also leads to negative reflections in our society. So I think this robot to me is actually quite wild.
It's really wild. I mean, I think um, it's possibly questionable, but of course, if the claims of the paper are what they say they are. I mean, as far as I know, I think the paper is not peer reviewed. I think it's just they uploaded it to archive, but it's still interesting nonetheless. And yeah, I would be very curious as to the actual values that are in
And I think,
the embeddings.
yeah, I think, and the fact that like in the paper it says that the moral, I think the thing for me is the moral score that I found really interesting, like the capabilities of a moral score. And I wonder, like, how can you score like morality. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess like my understanding of it is that maybe like 10 would be murdering is terribly wrong. That's the that's the highest like site of being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then one, I don't know, maybe like, I don't know, pinching someone. I don't know. Like, I just feel like it's how do you score right and wrong? So I think those are the kinds of things that, again, like if you're teaching a child from a young age, the difference between right and wrong. I think it's the human mind works in such a nuanced and different way that can we actually have that kind of understanding in a machine? And the machine's only going to really learn what, I guess, its environment of the coding and like whoever's talking to it is going to learn. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I had a look at their original paper where they looked at um, just the embedding, so without the sort of chatbot attachment to it, and essentially they got the way they are sort of coming up with this morality score is they look at how close a particular sentence, so maybe like should I kill someone or killing, how
Yeah.
close is that in the vector space to no, and the closer it is the more immoral that is perceived to be.
Mm-hmm.
But in the original paper they also come up with a list of other words that are close to no, and there's a lot of things that are bad. So, for example, yeah, sort of like immoral, like killing and torture, slander, perjury. But there's also things that are actually just disgusting, like actually gross, like suppurate. Suppurate, is that how you say that word? um, bloody. Yeah, things like stink, rot. So it's interesting to me also even that association of what's morally incorrect, like wrong, and what's disgusting. And I think they could do so many like cool things looking at this. Actually, how what does that say actually about our society? Because they also have the opposite, right? So things that are good, and they have things like nuzzle and hug and charm and coo like a baby. And
I
so
feel like
it's
these,
yeah.
yeah, I feel like these kind of go back to the like you go back into like religion, like back to the Bible, like with the sins of like the God, the sins of like killing your, thou must not like steal, and thou must not kill their neighbor, and it's all these like, I guess, these values and things that we've deemed as right or wrong, I guess, for centuries now going
Mm-hmm.
into our society. But again, I think with a robot, like can it actually, when you're talking to this robot, can it really actually understand, and if someone's talking to it, can they reimagine for the robot to maybe think that killing's acceptable now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Yeah, I think I would love to read a paper or do some experiments to see actually in what context does it think that killing it might be right or
Exactly.
okay,
Because
or lying and things like that. Yeah.
yeah, because I was thinking maybe like, I don't know, if a woman was in an abusive relationship and in self-defense, and she's potentially killed her husband, per se, in self-defense while he's attacked her, would could the robot understand whether that was right or wrong in that moment?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of, yeah, those are kind of contextual things that, when would it ever deem it being acceptable or not acceptable? And like you said, yeah, with lying as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I also wonder can we see anything about how different cultures view something, or even
Yeah.
to what extent maybe I guess a quote unquote Western culture is defining what moral is in this case. Because if we're, the paper is making claims about the humanities morality, but there is an understanding that morality is different across cultures. And this might actually show just to what extent the West might be defining what values are good and bad, and how would this look different from another culture's point of view.
Yeah, because I think as well, like you said, like going back to like religion, like the majority of the West, like from like centuries ago, has come from like Christianity. So our understandings of like right, wrong, good, bad, like things that are deemed to accept, so I guess throughout the years have progressed, but have essentially come down to the original, like in Europe from Christianity. So by culture and religion, I think that obviously has a massive like effect on how we as like humans deem what good and bad and right and wrong is. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to see, like, would this robot have a completely different understanding of morality depending on what country or culture it's being immersed in. And I guess it definitely would, but it'll be interesting to see. I would love to see more papers on this or more studies on this, actually, to see how this would develop, because I actually think the technology itself is like really advanced, obviously, and crazy to think. If you'd said this like 100 years ago that you could have a robot like telling you what's right and wrong and giving you like almost advice about things you should do in your life. But I guess you could even take it down to a day to day. It could be cute, I guess. You could be like, hey, should I eat another biscuit?
Yeah.
I've already had 10 already. Like, should I?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be like super interesting. I love the idea also that maybe through this kind of technology, I mean, this is kind of early stages, I guess, but that we might be able to actually quantify how immoral something is, and actually quantify morality differences between cultures, or between people as well. Because I think, even if we have as a culture general morality, of course there's individual values, I guess, as well. So it's I think it's really interesting. I'm going to look forward to its career with great interest, and I'll be sure to keep following these papers.
Sorry, I definitely want to keep up with this, because I think especially in philosophy, this is something that is obviously always talked about, like the action of like right and wrong, and understanding like morality, and also understanding human nature. And I think the more these robots continue to be developed, and the more this progresses, there's going to be more, I'm sure, philosophical papers written on this, as well as like the computer science side. So I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and on that note, I think we're up on our time. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. If you want to read the paper, we'll link it in the information for the podcast episode.
Yeah, and I think if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Let's Chat Ethics, and we'll be on Spotify, Apple, and Podbean. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Bye.